Before we start today's show, we want to invite you to stick around at the end of the episode to enjoy a preview of a new podcast that premieres on July 14th. As the industry's exclusive cannabis podcast network, MJ Bulls is proud to present Women Leading in Cannabis. Join host Kira Reed each week for inspirational discussions with women who are leading the cannabis industry.
So we're rolling. Jim Marty here. Welcome to the Deadhead Cannabis Show. I've got my partner in crime, Larry Mishkin, on the line. Larry, say hi.
Jim, how you doing? Wish I was out there with you, though. That's all I can say.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to these shows. The band has been playing so good. I just can't believe how good they sound. And as you all probably know, John Mayer got to play Jerry's Wolf guitar. They went and got it out of Hawk at the Met. Maybe we already talked about that in the last one.
A little bit, but that's okay because it was very cool that they did it and that he got to do it. And, you know, it would be wonderful if they'd let him take it on tour, but they probably don't want it to get too far away.
Right. And, since then I've listened to a couple of the songs that he played with the Wolf guitar, and it's just fabulous shows. Anyway, we have a special guest today. I'm here with my good friend and associate, Duke Rumley, and Duke Rumley's association is...
Hi, everybody. I have started a nonprofit called Sober AF Entertainment Safe.
And Duke has worked in the drug and alcohol rehab community for a number of years, and he and I have had many good talks over the years about the pros and cons of sobriety and alcohol and drugs and marijuana. And today we want to talk about the social impacts of legal marijuana from the point of view of the drug and alcohol community. So, Duke, I'm going to throw it over to you and sort of give us a 50,000-foot view, and then Larry and I will have some questions for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. So, Jim, I appreciate your support when I was working in the treatment world, helping get some people in treatment. And thanks for this opportunity to speak about our new nonprofit. So, SAFE creates safe spaces and fun places. We use our nonprofit status to get discounted tickets. We set up a sober safe zone inside music festivals, concerts, and sporting events to create a secondary culture out there that is not out there right now, ideally for anyone who wants to be in a community that is not with people who are drunk or high.
And so you'll be going to the shows today and tomorrow?
Correct. So we've been up and running for 13 months. We've hosted 37 events. We've had over 1,500 people join us. And for an event like this, for Dead & Company, we're throwing a sober tailgate 2 hours before the event, and anyone's welcome to come. And then ideally they go into the concert, and there's already a sober support group inside called Wharf Rats. And the Wharf Rats have been around since 1983, I believe. And it was really one of my early introductions of sobriety at Grateful Dead shows, which really made sobriety cool. So this was back in 1989. So what we're doing today is just setting up yellow balloons and having a sober tailgate for folks. And ideally, people can come and kind of recharge their batteries and realize they're not the only ones who will be sober at Dead & Company.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I'm very familiar with the Wharf Rats. I've seen their tents and booths set up at shows for many, many years. I've actually seen them have AA meetings at Setbrick.
Correct. They have kind of a check-in meeting, and it's ideal for anyone who really wants to have fun and see Dead & Company, but might feel a little triggered by being around a lot of people who are smoking weed or people who are drinking.
Like 50,000 people drinking.
Like, yes.
Duke,
it's going to be a pretty big number.
Hey, Duke, it's Larry Mishkin. First of all, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for coming out today and having this part of the conversation, because I think that it's a part that typically gets lost in all the excitement over everything else that's going on. And we forget that, while some people are celebrating, there's other people who, it's a real issue for. And, the fact that it's so readily available probably doesn't make their life any easier. I'm glad you mentioned Wharf Rats, and I love the idea that you've taken it outside of the stadium and introduced it, to the whole community pre-show and everything. And, it's funny, Jim, because this segues so well into everything that we're talking about here. Think about it, a rock and roll band who's, the whole mystery and everything behind them all centered around marijuana and LSD, and yet out of that community kind of organically grew this group that said, we want to be a part of this too, we just don't want to be that part of it. And the fact that they were able to do it and that they get it all set up like that, and that it's a standard part of any show I've ever been to. There's always that group and you can always find them. I think it's a wonderful thing, and Duke, you're to be congratulated for bringing it to the next level.
So we're going to talk about cannabis, of course, and cannabis as relates to people trying to get off of harder drugs. Duke has a lot of experience with people trying to get off of opioids. And before the show, you mentioned a drug that you deal with that helps people get off of opioids.
Right. So Jim was kind of asking about what do I see as the culture shift in the treatment world over the last 10 or 20 years since Colorado's had legal, recreational, and legal medical marijuana. And really, my comment was we've seen a bigger shift with a drug called Suboxone that is a opiate blocker that people take, and it goes into the brain and basically will just allow people not to get high on opiates. And that has been really the biggest shift over the last 5 years, where insurance companies came in and made sure that if you were going to get paid for residential treatment, you had to use this drug. So that has been really the biggest shift that I've seen. I've also mentioned that we're definitely working with kids who have some type of psychosis issue from using the much higher THC, either edibles or wax, and having a hard time to be able to adjust to residential treatment until they kind of get this psychosis taken care of.
Right. We were talking about that. And the way I look at it is concentrates like oils and waxes, your various edibles, it's kind of like beer is to whiskey. And it's almost the same process, because to make whiskey, you start with a beer mash and distill it down. And for the concentrates, you start with a plant matter, cannabis, usually the trim or other byproducts, not necessarily the flower. And those are distilled down into your waxes and terpenes. And of course, they are much stronger. And you don't drink as much whiskey as you do beer. But
in theory,
some people don't get the stop button. That is the problem.
Right.
And that's what Duke's been working with.
It's just fair to say, right, that's not your father's marijuana. It's a whole new era. And we are, I think it's important part of the education for everybody as well to understand that that's not just talk. But when we get into these things like waxes and even some of these, vape cartridges, which advertise themselves out at, 95% or something like that, that's almost kind of scary.
Right. Yeah. As someone who's tried dabs occasionally, it's much stronger than I would like for myself.
Yep.
Prefer the old fashioned, your father's cannabis, I guess. But anyway, what else do we want to talk about? Of course, there's the big, daddy of them all, alcohol, which causes more problems than I think all of the drugs put together. And tell us a little bit about your path to sobriety. Some 30 years, you said?
Right. So I had a very intense experience with alcohol around age 17, 16 years old, and it rewired my brain. No matter how much I thought I wasn't going to drink, my mind would change its own mind. At age 21, parents took me to rehab, and I've been fortunate to be sober ever since. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's the 12-step community. There's parental support. I was in college and had good structure. But big part of it was kind of the social aspect. And I was able to go to Grateful Dead shows with high school buddies who still drank and still got high. But if I was able to kind of hang out with the Wharf Rats, it was able to make sobriety cool. And that's what we're trying to do with this new movement. I had a 20-year-old and 17-year-old, and they were having bad experiences with their friends at Red Rocks and different concerts where they would go and then they'd be texting me that their ride was on ecstasy. And I just thought it's kind of ridiculous that these young kids didn't have a secondary culture. So we went out there to create a secondary culture for anyone who was looking to have some fun and trying to prove they could have fun without having to be on ecstasy. And the fear as a parent who's 51 years old with now a 21-year-old and 18-year-old, is I'm going to get that phone call that they did cocaine and there was fentanyl in it. And now they're dead. So we started this nonprofit and we're getting ready to take it national this fall.
So Duke, I have a question for you. How is the alcohol and drug rehab community handling people who are using marijuana to get off opioids?
That's what I wanted to ask, Jim. That's a good question.
Using, and say there's legitimate reasons for the opioids. Maybe you just had a knee replacement or a hip replacement. As friends, as aging baby boomers all have friends in those categories, and they find they can take less opioids if they're mixing or combining it with smoking cannabis.
Right.
Any comment on that?
So we in Colorado have been kind of the forefront of a lot of things, and we did have a sober living that was allowing people to smoke marijuana or use marijuana and live in sober environments, and that didn't play out very well. I would say typically, if there's a pain medication issue, there's certain treatment centers, Las Vegas Recovery Center and others that are a little more pain management, and they would use some non-addictive medicines, and I'm not quite sure what they are, but I haven't heard of any treatment centers that would allow cannabis to be the pain management while they're going through treatment. But we were kind of talking about like this next generation coming up right now seems to be less about alcohol and more about marijuana because they like the way they feel the next day.
Well, Duke, let me ask you this question because
go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, when I go to a lot of these conferences, one of the most popular attractions are the athletes for care, the former football players and the former hockey players, primarily, who all became very opioid dependent during their playing days because that was all they could use to deal with the pain. And post playing careers, they found themselves lying around the house still on the opioids, having trouble having relationships with their family and everything else. And they all tell the same stories about how they used the marijuana to transfer themselves off of the opioids and, back down to a much more manageable state where with some marijuana here and there, they could address most of the issues that they had been addressing before, and they really kind of looked at it as a savior that got them off of these opioids. And in Illinois now, our governor last year put in place a program for anyone who's on an opioid prescription at all. Their doctor can write them into the medical cannabis program for up to 90 days at a time, recognizing, the potential value that it has to help people get off of the opioids. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
So that totally makes sense, and that's why I think it's there. So to me, that would not be my concern. My concern is more underage prevention and also prevention for the people, let's say 10% of people who have a hard time regulating the amount of marijuana they're smoking. But to your point, the CBD, the THC, I think as a replacement to opiates seems to be working.
And unfortunately, Jim here, all of our evidence is really anecdotal. It's people we know who've been able to cut back on their opioids with marijuana. The thing I'm sure we all agree on is there needs to be much more research and development in this area to see, what are the medical aspects of cannabis and medical marijuana. The federal government has blocked that for so long. I hope that we're getting to a place now where the research can be done. The Israelis are very much ahead of the United States. Larry, I think you've actually been to Israel recently, haven't you?
That's correct. I was there in April and had an opportunity to hear everything that they're talking about. And Raphael Mishkin, who's a Holocaust survivor and moved to Israel after the war and became one of the leading researchers in the world on this. I mean, you go back to the early 1960s, and he was isolating THC and CBD. The Israeli government, their medical community, has 50 years of patient records for people who the government has given THC or CBD to help them and for testing purposes with a variety of illnesses. Unfortunately, in the United States, we still hold out and say that there has to be testing, through the protocols that the FDA sets up and that all the doctors are used to. But it really kind of rattles me a little bit when people suggest, well, there's just no research out there, so we don't know the answer. That's incorrect. There's a lot of research out there. It's just a question of, whether people take the time to go and read it. But you're right, Jim. Israel has been a real leader in this industry, for the last half century.
Well, this has been a great conversation, and it could go on for a long time. But let's shift gears, because today's what I call the Grateful Day.
Yeah, baby.
Means we have a show tonight. We're all really fired up for it. I haven't seen Dead & Company for a year since they were here a year ago, but I've certainly listened to a lot on the Grateful Dead channel, and they sound terrific.
And I saw them, and they were great, so you're in for a treat.
as anybody listened to the last program or two, we're going to focus in on one of the positions in the band and talk about it in general. And today we're going to talk about bass players. And I just saw Phil Lesh about a month ago at Red Rocks, and at 79 years old, he just filled Red Rocks with his bass. It was fabulous. He played two 90-minute sets, and he came out early and played with the warm-up band, so lots of great energy. And then last Sunday, I saw Widespread Panic, and I'm happy to report that David Schools is still thumping away. A big man that he is, he reminds me of like a big walrus over there, just thumping away on the side of the stage. But and he's also playing a custom 6-string modulus bass, very similar to Phil's. Then Otell this year has a new bass, and I don't really know much about it. Do you know that?
I saw that. It looks almost like it came out of Prince's house. You know, it's got one of those weird designs and shapes to it. That we saw it though, and it's in Chicago. It looks very cool. You'll see it.
That's great. Yeah.
So here's my feeling on it. You know, I say, we all go to the shows and we're like, oh, wouldn't it be great if Jerry was there? But of course he's dead, so that's not really an option. We all go to the shows and you want to say, gee, Phil not being there, he's alive, so it is an option. So then it brings it down to the typical point, right? I happen to be a big fan of Otell Burberry. I thought he was great when he stepped into the Allman Brothers. Every time I've seen him, he does not disappoint. He's got a wonderful voice, great enthusiasm and energy, and he really has the songs down well. Having said all of that, and I say it all with utmost respect for him, and I think he might even agree with this, they can play the other one 100 times, but until you have Phil's booming bass that is, his particular style, his particular way, or in Jack Straw, Jim, you and I have talked about that when they come around on Jack Straw, and all of a sudden Phil is there in the front of the stage, rocking the whole auditorium. That comes with the connections that we were talking about last week, like the drummers have with one another. And Phil is really part of that family. And I think the hardest part of going to Dead & Company is knowing that Phil is out there, but he's not playing with them. Now, again, having said all of that, Phil has a tendency to sing sometimes, and unless it's one of his songs, I'd rather he just stick to playing the bass. If Otell pipes up with a song, I can listen to him when he does come to time. It brings tears to your eyes. He's that good.
Yeah, well, what you're talking about is what they call Phil bombs. He just comes right down the neck of his guitar, ba 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 ba, boom, and just fills the arena, or fills Red Rocks with a giant bass note. Back in the day,
you can feel it go through your body.
Yeah, you can feel it. And I'll bring Mike Gordon into this conversation too, because obviously as a bass player for Phish, he's one of the leading bass players in touring rock and roll today. And these bass players are not especially interested in sharing their trade secret. There's a lot of intellectual property that goes into their bass guitar and their rig and all the technology. And certainly in the case of everybody we're talking about, money is not an issue. They can have any rig they want in the world. And they're not all that interested in telling other people exactly how they have it set up. I know for sure Mike Gordon has said that publicly.
Yeah, and Mike, he's a great example too, because in many respects, half the time I don't even think of him as a bass player. And when they do that, a Mike's Groove, right, and as they're coming out of I Am Oxygen or whatever the bridge song is, and they're jumping into Weekapaw Groove, all of a sudden Gordon jumps up to the front of the stage and he plays his bass as though it was like a guitar, right? The way he has about that 25 or 30-second introduction, and he's wailing on a bass guitar like I've never seen anybody. That to me is just outstanding.
And of the 4 bass players we're talking about, they all do have a very unique sound, whether it's how they play the bass or their setup and their amps. But certainly Mike's bass and Phish, very, very unique. We've talked about Phil with his Phil bombs, and David Schools when he notice he like spreads his legs about shoulder width apart and leans back and looks straight up at us at Red Rocks, and ba 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 boom comes out of his. So all 4 great bass players, 4 great unique sounds, and so we'll look forward to seeing Mr. Otell Burbridge today. What's the song that he's been singing this tour with Dead & Co? It's really good, and I'm just thinking the name of it right now.
God, the shows we saw, he didn't really do a lot of singing in Chicago. They kind of filtered away from him, but that's what I love about him, because like when they had him do Comes a Time a couple of years ago, which is one of my all-time favorite Jerry songs, and it just kind of came out of nowhere, and there was Otell up there doing it, and boy, he's really a talent. And you're right, we could talk about all these guys all day long, and Phil probably has an edge just because he's the grandfather of the group and has been around forever. But for me, the one thing that makes Phil really special too, and I know we isolated this on Mickey Hart last week as well, is that Phil is responsible for, one of the, if some people would say, the greatest song in the entire dead canon of music. And I was at Hampton Beach, Virginia in 1987 when they broke out, 86, 87, when he broke out Box of Rain for the first time in 15 years. And, of all the shows that I've ever been at where they broke out songs, that one may have been the most electric, when people all thought he was stepping up to the mic to sing Tom Thumb's Blues, which he had been singing a lot on that tour. And all of a sudden they broke into Box of Rain, and people were just sitting there singing along with tears in their eyes, because you don't know if you're ever going to see something like that again. And it was definitely one of the top 3 or 4 highlights of my entire Dead touring career.
Love Box of Rain, and now that you mention it, maybe we'll get a Box of Rain tonight or tomorrow night. Some of the folks may not know that Box of Rain, Phil wrote that about his father when his father was passing away, and that's the last line of that song. Such a long, long time to be gone, and a short time to be there, right?
Yeah. Whenever they play that as an encore, right, at the end of a show, and you hear that, and that's exactly what you're thinking, because it's like 4 hours just flew by in the wink of an eye, and now they're gone again. And it's true.
Yep.
Even when they're there, and even when I stop and stay there, I'm really, boom, it's too much happiness. It flies right by. But you know what? That's a good thing, because it just leaves you wanting more.
Yep, it sure is, and it reminds us all that we're here for a very short time, and enjoy every minute while you're here.
Amen, brother. Well, next week, I think it's time to move on to rhythm guitar and our good friend, Mr. Weir. And that should be a fun conversation, too, because I've been doing a little more research on him lately and talking to people, and it's beginning to change my thoughts on him a little bit, but we'll touch on that next week. Well,
that sounds good. I'm looking forward to talking about Bob Weir, because I've had a long, long relationship listening to Mr. Bob sing, and as Big Steve Parrish recently called him, he calls him the California Songbird. So we'll talk about him next week.
That's a great name. Well, great. Duke, let me just say again, it was a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing all that information with us. It's informative, and I think it's also really helpful in terms of giving us ideas on how to, move forward in this industry while being cognizant of, people who are out there who, may support what we're doing, but not by participating themselves.
Right. You bet. Feel free to check out the website. It's soberafe.com. And we're going to be in New York and Miami and all over this coming fall. So you can check out our entire schedule on that.
Excellent. All right, everybody, over and out.
Very good.
We're off to Folsom Field, and we'll report back on the 2 Dead shows next week.
Have a great time. Stay dry.
US Blues,
yeah. Calling it. All right.
All right, bye now.
Thanks, guys.
Tell me, boy, you make me so bored. You need to walk the other way. I tell you once more. Please get out of my way. I don't want you no more. We're done here, boy. I know you think you're so fine, but you can't see it. I've been wanting to
Hi, my name is Kira Reed, and I'd like to invite you to be inspired by the women who are leading in the cannabis industry. Each week, we will discuss empowerment, leadership, and what it means to be a woman in charge in marijuana, hemp, and CBD. As the founder of the Women Empowered in Cannabis community, I have had the great pleasure to get to know many brilliant and talented women who are CEOs, executives, politicians, advocates, and community leaders that are focused on creating a cannabis economy that is just, fair, and equal. We'll learn how these women make decisions, how they navigate a predominantly male industry, and what they're doing to level the playing field for women. I hope you'll join us.